That's the varroa mite. That little brown dot on her thorax.
I've heard all sorts of names.
There you go.
So this is what happens when you get stung.
So she started laying here and went and then laid out here.
Varroa destructor is the largest parasite to host that we know of, right? Correct? It's about the size of a bath. If you, as soon as you had consciousness of your surroundings, and you woke up with a basketball-sized tick attached to you, that is the same way for the bee. So
when did they change the name from Varroa destructor, from Varroa jacobsoni to Varroa destructor?
Varroa jacobsoni is the tracheal mite, right?
No, that's the old name for Varroa.
Old name. Do you know when they changed that?
When they found out it wasn't Varroa jacobsoni?
Right, actually, because they've been calling it the whole time. The year I went to Australia, the actual day I landed over there, I had a talk on Varroa jacobsoni. I get there and Doug Summerall and those that were in Australia who helped get the name changed watched and waited for me to put my presentation up and said, "Don't you know that name's been changed?" I'm like, "No."
While you were on the airplane.
On the airplane, 3-day flight over.
Wow.
Yep.
Then you see how you can blow on them and move them away.
Jacobsoni for years.
How do you know how much smoke to put on there?
Well, there isn't really a given amount of smoke, but just smoke as needed. So when I say smoke as needed, like whenever I see the bees start to be a little bit more flighty, they start to headbutt me, they start to look. Those are whenever you know, okay, I should probably smoke, or if you get stung. You get sprayed wherever you got stung.
See, she kind of runs through there like a bulldozer.
Oh, you already saw the queen?
Like she owns the place.
She's down on the bottom.
He hadn't got that yet. He didn't at that time. The next trip over, I guess he learned about there. They had one very similar to that. Beetle blaster was pretty good.
Not a whole lot of
My grandpa.
brood on that frame, is it?
You dripping stuff out too. Is it pollen or is it nectar?
Could have been queen. Maybe
Could
was
be.
crawling around.
She wasn't flying too well.
She could have dropped down on the bottom board too. Never know.
What's that squish team down there for, Bob?
Never know.
I don't think she's doing a good job on getting
This
some.
one right here is doing a waggle dance. Watch this.
Where's she saying the
that
nectar's at, Bobby?
I don't know. Quarter mile that away. I wonder how closely they put the bees on the source.
Well, for the distance, they put it in the general direction.
Pretty Quarterman color.
Yeah.
There's
Smells.
so many flowers that bloom.
They don't do a small patch.
And you know, there's
It's
some,
not a flower they're going
right.
after.
And there's evidence that it may only be very few, because when we did the training on them, for finding nitrates, we could put something quarter to a half mile out. And the bees were
Right now I'm
hitting
trying
on
to
it
look for the queen for you
within
guys to
seconds
show you.
hitting on it from the hive, so they had no time to be
get there
able to do the waggle tail. You know,
She's probably going back and forth.
but we've never tried to. Now there's a dreaded pest of the honeybee that's actually worse. It just was on her shirt. Love bug.
Oh, I mean, he was mentioning
They're a
moving
pest
within the
that
hive. So
doesn't
they
even
could have
bother
been
the hive, they bother
on
the
the
nectar.
far side when you open the first frame, and then she could have moved across.
Okay, but she stays.
They don't like that smell.
She
Mainly
takes
on one side.
one mating flight, and
Multiple
then
mating flights in a single
A
period.
lot of wagglers.
she will.
I think we're
Then
telling where
the next time she
rain
leaves
They
will
are
be
weather reports.
whenever she swarms.
transmitting information as to where
Well, like
resources.
termites, for example, their queens are so engorged that they can't even move. So for a
David just told
few
me
social
most
organisms,
people
she is quite lucky.
A little bit, and then the clouds.
Can you show that guy in the green with
Clouds
drone
coming in,
tab
they
cells?
did
Yeah,
some work
talking
with
about
Bobby
it.
where they'd have to go around
Buzzing a little bit louder.
The
stuff, and it
cap
was
drone
interesting
cells that
because,
you asked about.
you know, elevations, you might have had
Right.
1,500 foot in elevation.
Right.
And those bees would move
find her?
in the wagon tail.
Yeah, you showed me. I saw
God,
her.
that there'd be
It was on this.
a outside or, you know, if you did stuff out of
Is she marking up?
That means, yeah, they're not running a figure eight. They're just standing there and going.
control of the sound, there's
And the
a
taller they are,
vibration.
then this
Because the
worker.
bee on the backside of that frame could pick it up just as well. And she's doing a wagon tail that's
One just tapped me in
I
the
think
ear.
it's a cell phone. There's the cell.
Just got stung on.
is
No,
the
she
phone
flew in my
vibrating
ear
through
and
it.
bounced off.
There is some evidence
How
that
they're
they
standing
pick
in
up
front of
the
the entrance
vibrations off the
and
cone.
Heard about that?
That's probably one of the worst feelings I've ever had, is a bee calling into my ear. The sound of it is incredible.
They always
Inside
get
the nose
different
hurts.
phones.
Yeah, I got stung in the face.
I hear
and she
the
went and called
phones
into
kill
my
them.
ear.
If you set that phone on top of a bee, it kills them. What's the queen look like? Does she got a crown or a tiara? A blonde?
I wish. Make it easier.
Do you just lay in bed at night coming up with these, writing them down?
Too long in knowing this family. And being at workshops and being
Here's a
at
mine
state
on the back of the
fairs.
glass.
And
You can see right there. You can see the
She just pointed it out so she can show you where it's at again.
A mite on a bee?
On a bee.
On the queen?
Not on the
No.
queen.
But do they raise on queens? Yeah.
The
They can
brolids
raise. Yeah.
that are actually a fly, not a mite,
Right,
they
yeah.
prefer the queen.
Right. In Australia, we saw them when they were all around feeding on
Crazy,
the
they like
turtle.
really ride on the thorax and they come up and drink from her mouth.
But that's some poor ass bees that don't even keep the queen clean.
Clean, yeah, from a little wingless fly.
Well, they are like
They
cast
stick.
on there too.
Yeah. It's hard to find them here in Florida. We see the tracks through the honey.
Yeah, well, we
The
have the
trails.
postdoc in our lab is a
You
teen
get
sample.
good
I
at
think he did find
So one
one.
thing you can do,
We finally got a state record of
sometimes
40
they will
years
do
ago
what like
for Florida. James Hall,
what I've
who I
always
took
called
his
an
position,
holding court.
he got a
attendance
roll
will
when we were
ring
doing
around
tracheal
her.
mites there.
If she's in space,
And got a
now
state
if she's moving,
fine
she just
for it.
moves.
It had never been found. We knew it was here,
That's crazy.
but
If
we saw
she's
the
sitting
tracks.
there,
Strong.
That's right.
they will surround her, start feeding her,
That's the male
groom
queen.
her.
The king bee.
Termites are actually really cool. They
I
have
ain't sticking her. It's sticking him in there.
Does anyone have any questions? Well,
How often do you
go in your
hive like this and check
it out?
How many beekeepers does it take to find a queen?
one
Is that a Polish dog? Are you being?
every 14 days during the spring and fall,
There's one
whenever
that
there's a good flow,
vibrating.
um,
That's gorgeous.
as needed in the wintertime. So you don't want to open them up like
What do you need now?
that.
He probably
frequently
poked
during the
that
winter because of
staple.
how cold it is. You want to keep their cluster tight, but you do at
You
least
said
want to check
it's not.
once during the late
I'm on this drone for you. Here, hold on. It's not.
at least a
Hold on, if I squeeze it hard enough.
It's not a bad thing if they go from queen to broodless during the wintertime. Just as long as they have a queen, they'll be fine. But
You saw her just
wintertime is really
a
tough
little
for them
bit
because they'll
ago, right
overheat.
before Logan
So
put
whenever
that
you
frame.
check them during the summertime, you're checking to make sure they have good food storage, that there's still at least a right queen in there. But you want to check for 14 days during the spring and fall for swarm cells because it takes 16 days for queen cells to develop and hatch. So you have that 2-day grace period. So is it really important?
By the wing.
Right
With the
here.
workers too, you just try to
Got a
get
mic.
both wings.
If a worker has her
Don't
head in
like
the
me.
cell,
Where I judge my shrimp.
like this one,
Yeah.
she's busy and her wings are right there.
So occasionally when you can see
I just
that there might,
If they're if she's got her.
Sometimes you can even like brush against them.
So if you see the mites here, what do you do now? You just keep an eye on it to see
Yeah,
if it
pointed
spreads?
away from you.
No,
come in
they're
behind
gonna
you.
have
Oh,
mites.
okay.
You can pick up
You got bees in Florida, and chances are you got mites.
See how dark that one is as opposed to that one?
Just because they've been here for so long.
They're half sisters. The worker bees
So you're just looking for quantity.
potentially
You
have
see a whole bunch
lots
of
of
them.
different follicles.
No, you can't. Visual tests won't do
So the
anything.
queen can make
Looking for them won't tell you anything. You can see.
12, 15 drones.
See if
So
I
there
can
can
do
be a
this
lot
without
of half
mushing one and then losing it. I saw one that had a really good picture.
Queen doesn't, the queen doesn't get them. They're not in packets or anything like that, are
No, it gradually mixes over time.
they?
So it's randomized.
So she has, okay.
So the way you test for mites
After,
is with
and when she first
alcohol
mates,
wash.
she holds all of the sperm, like she doesn't take it into her spermatheca, so
even-
then it's not as random.
So
It
other
could be a
signs
bit
of
more
mites
sequential,
by
but
just not seeing mites
over the
are
course
the
of time it mixes.
diseases and viruses
So
that
when
come
a
along
queen
with
does
the
not
pests.
mate,
So
Right.
you might
within,
see
3 or 4
bees
days,
with wings that are
physiologically cannot
look
be-
like they're burnt off. That's deformed wing virus. You might see bees
Do they
So
continue to mature
try
or
to
something
clean
inside
pupa
them?
and accidentally
So
rip
at
their
what
heads
point
off,
are they not
and then the
capable of
larvae
reproducing
turn
like
into mush. That's a sign of PMS, parasitic
another
mite
one.
syndrome.
I don't know. Well, you mean not capable of mating?
so
They're able
there's,
to reproduce like by laying eggs.
Right, but before that, like even getting
and whenever you see that, you want to definitely start to take
No longer
action.
can.
You can add apple cider vinegar to your sugar water to raise the pH of
I don't know. I think
feed,
physiologically
and that
they
will
should be able to
clear
make
up a
later.
lot of the parasitic mite syndrome, but it's not going to kill the mites. So whenever you hear people saying they organically treat for mites, if it's not killing the mite, it's not doing anything. Like sugar shakes are an organic way to get the mites off of the bees. That's only going to frustrate the bees and frustrate the mites, because now the bees are covered in sugar and they have to clean each other, and the mites frustrated because it has to crawl up back up the bottom board. It's not going to kill the mite at all. It's just going to frustrate everything. And rotating treatment's important when dealing with pests and diseases. If you use one treatment over and over and over again, of course something's going to start to build resistance. Another way they can build resistance is not following the label. So if you leave it in for longer than what it should be, because you'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to leave it in for 50 days instead and get even a better effect. That's not how things work. You got to leave it in for how long it says, because that's the optimal treatment. And if you leave it in for longer, it introduces sublethal doses, and then the mite becomes resistant to whatever you're using. And
Speaking of,
Yep.
what was that?
label's the law. If you break the label and you're using something that's not supposed to be in a beehive, it's $250 per hive per whatever treatment is being used in a non-legal fashion. So if I'm using like the corrugated plastic with roach pesticide to treat for beetles, I will get a $250 fine for, most of the time it's 2 times. So 2 times per hive, 250 plus. If I'm using Tactic with paper towels, that's another 250 for that application per hive. So it's because there's a lot of things that are labeled to kill a certain pest, to be used in a certain way, and there's a reason why they're labeled that way. And there's a ton of research trying to help broaden that your choices, as well as to try to help make those certain choices work better.
So how do you know where to put them now? Like,
I just remembered where they went, and now I'm organizing some of them in a fashion that makes better sense for them, like those frames that had more pollen than they did brood. I'm pushing them out to the side, and the frames that had more more consolidated cat brood, I'm moving more towards the middle.
Was behind me.
But
You got me
these three
jumping
specifically
around.
went here, so that's why I left that gap open over here. Because this was the frame that we thought had the queen on it, and it was the second to last.
You also don't have to pull all of them out. You can just take one out and make space, and then keep putting them back in order if you're afraid you're going to forget.
Yeah.
well,
And you can mix them up in the springtime and get away with it. But you do want to keep the brood together. And one of the outside frames, if they've drawn out one side but the other side's kind of blank, you can turn it around and make them work on that other side.
I'll tell you this, beekeeping is problem solving and letting the bees kind of do what they want with what you give them. If the bees don't like it, take it out. If the bees are using it, but they're just not using both sides, flip it. If the bees are doing really good on food and laying well, but they're just disorganized, reorganize it for them. Because one big cluster is better than two smaller clusters, trying to keep the brood warm. And it's all about adapting to what the bees are doing.
Like commercial business, you would either sell like nukes or be a breeding breeder.
Yep, I know what's going on with my bees.
You see that frame, I would turn around.
What's up?
Make them work on the other side. See how the white side is?
That you can trust to treat your bees like you would.
I'd let them work on that white side since they have this pretty well drawn.
I joke all the
Since it's
time.
springtime and
Like, why am I
working and bringing in resources and building comb and making wax, now's the time to give them work.
Never goes back the way it is.
Job, but I just work like 80 hours.
So you took
Just
it out.
try not to
Special.
roll. Yeah, you can just.
I try to pass them off on him because he'll walk by you in the bee yard and do like that and pass them.
All right, so we covered the different caste of bees. We covered the workers and the different stages. We covered the drones and how they only come from the mom. We covered the queen, her one big mating flight where she takes multiple flights and gets mated, comes back, starts laying. We talked about, we didn't talk about how honey's made. So they go out to the flower, they get the nectar, they bring it back here, and basically honey is dehydrated nectar. They go through stages of blowing bubbles, fanning it until it's just the right way. They'll cap it over, and then we have honey.
Is there such a thing as organic honey?
No. Beekeeping does get expensive because, like I said, if bees aren't growing, they're dying. If you have one hive and you want to keep one hive, well, then I suggest that you do swarm prevention, swarm management, and sell that nook to someone else. Because if your hive is staying stagnant, it's not going to remain stagnant for long. As soon as a good amount of mites build up, a good dearth season goes, what have you, it's going to plummet, it's going to die. So you always want to be growing bees, and even during those dearth seasons, you still want to see some type of growth by adding those substitute feed of sugar water, whether it be half and half or just a little bit more water to sugar, depending on what kind of dearth you're seeing. During the winter time, you want it to be more heavy on the sugar. During the summertime, you want it to be more heavy on the water. And the pollen patties, I normally feed them during the hotter parts of the summer and into the winter, because that's just the location. And that's another thing is in beekeeping, you have to understand what's blooming and be 40 days ahead of that bloom. So I don't want to put my honey super on as I'm walking out saying, oh, the blooms are opened up, because now I've lost quite a bit of that flow. So you want to go ahead and put your supers on 40 days before to let the bees fix the wax, build the wax, prepare it, so that whenever they do start to bring it in, they have somewhere to put it. And probably the next question will be when to take the super off. So it also depends on what's blooming and your equipment. The kind of rule is you want to sweep the box off after 6 or 80% of the super entirety is full. But if you are in a good flow and you want to stack honey supers on top, you want to stack them once they're 60%, because bees are going to work fast. If they have comb put it in, you'll be surprised at what a bee can do in just a couple of days. So does anyone know what an individual bee contributes to honey in her lifetime?
Teaspoon.
Yeah.